Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the heavy, shadowed halls of an ancient castle, where the cold stone soaks up every sound, and even your own footsteps feel like an enemy's approach. You're wrapped in velvet robes far too luxurious for this kind of ordeal, and a jeweled crown slightly asks you from bumping into one too many door frames. The torch you hold flickers weakly, casting monstrous, writhing shadows on the walls. You think you know your own castle. You should know it. After all, you paid good coin for it to be built. But tonight you realize you're just as trapped as any invader would be. Worse yet, you're the king. You probably won't survive this one with your pride intact. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where and when you're tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge forward, the thick soles of your slippers smacking against uneven stone, each step a fresh opportunity to stub your royal toes. The night is silent except for the occasional screech of a settling beam or the faint howl of the wind through arrow slits high above. In the distant great hall, your courtiers are probably still feasting, laughing, and utterly unaware of your plight. The corridor you're in was charming in the daylight. Tapestries depicting your ancestors, grand wooden doors etched with heraldry, the occasional friendly bust of a forgotten general. But now, under the faint light of a dying torch, those tapestries twist into looming monsters, the doors look like mouths ready to swallow you whole, and the busts? Well, let's just say you're sure one of them moved a second ago. Historians still argue whether medieval castles were intentionally disorienting or if the architects were just having a particularly rough century, but standing here in the gloom, the answer feels obvious. You reach an intersection of hallways, 3 identical choices. You think back, did you turn left or right coming from the hall? Or was it straight? Your mental map, painstakingly formed during royal inspections, crumples like wet parchment. You choose the middle path because, frankly, you're the king and you refuse to let a building defeat you. The walls press tighter. Some corridors were designed intentionally narrow, better for bottlenecking enemies, but now it just means you have to crab walk your way sideways, crown scraping the stones. Somewhere behind you, something scuttles. You whirl, torch high, only to find an empty hallway. A rat? A ghost? A treacherous courtier who slipped away from the party with a mind to unsettle you? Ghosts seem more likely. After all, medieval castles are rife with tales of restless spirits, knights who fell defending their homes, mistreated servants seeking revenge, queens locked away for plotting. You swallow hard and march forward. It's not just the layout that's confusing. Castles are alive in their own way, full of drafts that whisper like voices, floors that shift with the seasons, and shadows that seem to have their own agendas. Add in the cloying scent of damp stone and extinguished fires, and you start to wonder if the place resents being ruled at all. You pass a tiny window, an arrow loop, really, and glance out. The night is thick and impenetrable. No moon, no stars, just the sense of infinite darkness pressing against the thin pane of leaded glass. You could jump, but it's a 50-foot drop to the moat. And let's be honest, you'd miss the water. Your hand tightens on the torch. Remember that one king who thought Crocodile Dun sunscreen was a good idea? Yeah, compared to getting lost in your own castle, that looks like peak leadership. Still, you have to admire the ingenuity behind these thick walls. Fortresses weren't just slapped together. Every tower, every turn, every murder hole was carefully planned. Most castles didn't even have simple layouts. Spiral staircases were built clockwise so defenders could stab easily while right-handed, corridors curved to slow down a rush, false doors led nowhere, dead-end hallways trapped invaders. Quirky tidbit, some castles even had whispering galleries, designed so that a conversation at one end of a hall could be clearly heard at the other. Great for spies and gossip, and right now, great for making you paranoid about every faint sound. Still, your pride bubbles up. You're the monarch. The fortress bows to your lineage. With a sniff and a yank of your robes, you march onward. 5 minutes later, you realize you've walked in a complete circle. You stand there, torch drooping, your royal patience thinner than the soles of your embroidered slippers. A circle. You, King of England, undisputed ruler of land and law, have just outsmarted yourself with the architectural equivalent of a slapstick joke. But you're not alone in this humiliation. Castles were designed to confuse invaders, and, as you were discovering, occasionally the very monarchs who lived in them. Why were castles so confusing? you wonder, as you squint down 3 more identical hallways. Because confusion was a weapon, just as vital as any sword or trebuchet. Castles were meant to be strongholds of security, not open floor-plan palaces. If an enemy breached the outer walls, and, frankly, even if they didn't, chaotic, twisting interiors made it almost impossible to reach key areas like the keep, treasury, or your personal chambers. Defensive architecture wasn't just about moats and murder holes. It was about disorientation, bottlenecking, and exhaustion. Historians still argue whether every labyrinthine feature was intentional or if medieval builders simply ran out of coherent blueprints halfway through construction. Some claim it was a little of both. With no formal architects, just masons working off rough sketches and their own experience, castles evolved organically, more like coral reefs than master-planned estates. And like coral reefs, they were stunningly effective at getting you hopelessly turned around. A mainstream fact, early Monan Bailey castles were simple, just wooden keeps on raised mounds, but as stone construction took over, designs became more complex. Concentric walls, zigzagging staircases, multiple baileys, all to confuse and frustrate any attacker. You, dear king, have become the clumsiest of attackers. You take a left, resolving to keep one hand brushing the cold stone wall at all times, one of those simple tricks you heard a squire mumble once. It's supposed to prevent you from walking in circles. You wonder if it works better for people not weighed down by 5 pounds of velvet and authority. A new smell greets you, the faint tang of old iron. Armory? No, too sharp. Torture chamber? Possibly, but let's not linger on that thought. PG-13, remember. You shuffle forward, the torch stuttering in protest, your breath misting in the cold air. And then, thud, you smack face first into a heavy wooden door. An ordinary king might see this as a sign to turn back. Not you. You're desperate. You plant your shoulder against the door and shove. It groans open on rusted hinges, revealing a spiral staircase snaking upwards into darkness. Castles loved spiral staircases. They weren't just space-saving, they were military genius. Built clockwise ascending, they favored right-handed defenders and hampered right-handed attackers, who'd find it harder to swing their swords. A fringe tidbit, there are rare counterclockwise staircases in some castles, believed to have been designed for left-handed lords. You wonder if those lords also got lost, or if left-handedness bestowed better internal GPS. Your steps clank noisily as you ascend. Spiral staircases were also narrow, forcing single-file movement. Bad for armies, bad for lost kings. After what feels like a century, and several increasingly colorful muttered oaths, you reach a landing. 3 more doors. You're beginning to suspect that somewhere deep in the castle's bones, a gleeful architect is laughing. Choosing one at random, you push it open and step into a hall you think might lead toward your chambers. Maybe. The tapestries are different, showing hunting scenes instead of battles. That's a good sign. Or it's a terrible sign. Hard to tell at this point. You press on. Another weird quirk of castle design? Doors that weren't really doors. Some were deliberately fake, wooden panels hiding solid stone. Meant to confuse enemies. Or monarchs. You pound on one just to be sure and feel the unmistakable vibration of a lie beneath your palm. Your stomach growls. You realize you've been gone from the feast longer than planned. Perhaps long enough that your courtiers have begun to notice. Perhaps long enough that they've started whispering. Your face heats with the thought. You're a king, a leader of men, anointed by God, and yet here you are, clutching a guttering torch, lost like a child in a hedge maze. The wind outside picks up, whistling through unseen cracks, and for a moment you hear what sounds like laughter. Not that you're superstitious, of course. You glance back down the corridor. No help coming. You trudge forward, slipping once on an unseen patch of slick moss growing between stones. Lovely. Your robes now carry the distinct scent of damp mildew. The hallway splits again. At this point, you half expect a minotaur to round the corner. Instead, you get another corridor lined with suits of armor, standing silent and gleaming dully in the faltering light. The suits are empty, you remind yourself. Empty. But as you pass, you swear one moves ever so slightly, as if shifting in its metal shell to better watch your progress. It's going to be a long night. You adjust your slipping crown and square your shoulders, trying to summon what remains of your dignity. It's not easy to feel commanding when you're being silently judged by empty suits of armor. But onward you go, because you are, after all, the king. and no king worth his scepter is defeated by his own masonry. You mentally review your options. Summon help? Embarrassing. Sit down and wait for morning? Even more embarrassing. Press forward and pretend this is a purposeful inspection? Now that has potential. Let's pause and meet the poor soul you're currently embodying. Historians still argue whether it was Henry II, Richard II, or some less celebrated royal who famously got lost in his own castle, but the story has stuck around for a reason. Whoever he was, he's become the face of monarchical misadventure, an early pioneer of fake-it-till-you-make-it leadership strategy. A mainstream fact, kings, for all their pomp and grandeur, were surprisingly vulnerable. Their castles were symbols of power, yes, but also traps of their own making. Defenses meant to repel invaders could just as easily ensnare their lord and master. No GPS, no floor plans, no friendly "you are here" signs, just stone, darkness, and a lot of guesswork. You pass through another arched doorway, this one framed by heavy oak beams darkened with age. The smell here is different, smoky, greasy, almost savory. Kitchens? Finally, progress. You quicken your pace, at least, as much as your slippered feet and royal robes allow. The torch flickers and sputters again, casting jittery shadows on the walls. You half expect a cook to round the corner with a ladle raised in alarm. Instead, silence. Another fun, fringe tidbit, many royal kitchens were located in separate buildings or wings, partly to reduce fire risk to the main castle and partly to keep the smells of roasting meat and boiling stews from wafting through the royal apartments. Kitchens were often labyrinthine in their own right, with storerooms, pantries, sculleries, and bakeries sprawling across multiple levels. Great for feeding a court. Less great for finding your way out. You eat between massive tables and hearths big enough to roast a whole boar. The lingering sense of burnt bread and old lard cling to the air, mingling with the mustiness of stone and smoke. A tray of yesterday's trencher loaves sits abandoned, the stale bread hard as rock. You consider snagging a piece. Desperation makes a man bold, but think better of it. There's still a sliver of royal pride to maintain. You spot a narrow stairwell tucked behind a larder door, leading up. Another gamble, but at this point, what choice do you have? You ascend, counting each step, the numbers a small, meaningless comfort. Halfway up, you hear it. Voices. Not ghostly whispers this time, but real, human voices, muffled and indistinct. Relief blooms in your chest. You are saved. You'll stroll back into the great hall like nothing happened, perhaps mumble something about inspecting the foundations if pressed. Surely a king can spin a little absence into an air of authority. You push open a door at the top of the stairwell, and step directly into a broom closet. Darkness, dust, and a distinct whiff of mildew greet you. The voices fade, distant and mocking. You shut the door quickly before anyone sees you and sigh. Historians still debate whether the term castle refers to the entire complex or just the fortified residence of the lord. Either way, you're trapped in it, a royal prisoner of poor navigation skills. You press on, wrenching open another door, stepping into another corridor. This one looks vaguely familiar. A red tapestry you recognize, a hunting scene where the deer always seem to be giving the hunter a cheeky, knowing glance. Hadn't you seen this earlier? You realize with a sinking heart that you're back where you started. A breeze brushes past you, cool, damp, and carrying the distant smell of the stables. That's good. Stables mean the outer courtyard can't be far. And the outer courtyard means you can re-enter the keep properly, make a grand entrance, maybe even claim you were inspecting the defenses personally. You hurry toward the source of the breeze, robes swirling, crown wobbling dangerously. The corridor narrows, the walls closing in, the torch finally giving up the ghost with a sad hiss. Plunged into near-total darkness, you do the only reasonable thing. You proceed blindly, one hand scraping the rough stone wall, the other cradling the extinguished torch like a useless relic. Your foot hits something soft. You freeze. Then something sharp jabs your shin, followed by an indignant bleat. A goat! Of course, a goat. Loose livestock in the castle was hardly unusual. Even royal households needed fresh milk and meat. But being thwarted by a goat in the dead of night adds a special flavor of humiliation to your evening. You step gingerly around it, muttering apologies you hope no one hears. In the distance, another sound, the clank of armor, the faint rasp of voices. Real people. Salvation. Or, given your luck tonight, another goat-themed obstacle course. You straighten your robes, settle your crown more firmly on your head, and prepare to reclaim your dignity. At least, what's left of it. You shuffle forward, cautious but determined, hoping the next corner won't reveal another goat, or worse, another broom closet. The voices grow louder, more distinct now. You can almost make out the words, laughter, murmurs, the unmistakable clink of tankards. Could it be? The Great Hall? Sweet, merciful deliverance? But no! As you round the corner, a heavy iron-banded door looms before you. There's a familiar coat of arms carved into the stone above it, your coat of arms. At least that's something. You reach for the iron latch, cold against your fingers, and push. The door creaks open to reveal another corridor. This one longer, grander, lined with faded banners and the hollow stares of ancestral portraits. You groan inwardly but step through. Castles weren't designed to be intuitive, you remind yourself. They were meant to intimidate. That was part of their charm and their strategic brilliance. Blueprints? Medieval architects scoffed at the idea of symmetry or logic. One of the most confusing castles ever built, Château de Chambord in France, sports a double helix staircase where two people can ascend and descend without ever seeing each other. Genius? Madness? Historians still argue over it. You drag your feet along a thick, worn carpet that was probably imported from some distant land, Persia, maybe. The air smells faintly of old wax and older wood. If you squint, you can almost imagine the castle as it was in its prime, bustling with servants, echoing with music and the low murmur of politics, intrigue slipping between the stones. Tonight, though, it's just you in a labyrinth that seems to mock your every turn. The hall splits again, but this time you notice something encouraging, a tiny slit in the stone, just large enough to glimpse the great hall. Candlelight flickers beyond, golden and warm, and you can just make out the long trestle tables and the blurred shapes of your courtiers feasting. You're close. So close. You pick the right-hand passage, moving as quickly as dignity allows. The blueprints of castles were crafted, not by architects as we think of them today, but by master masons who often designed as they built, improvising as needs changed. Walls were thick not only for defense but also to house hidden passageways, stairwells, and escape routes. Quirky fact, some castles even had latrines designed with chutes that dumped waste into the moat, a feature both practical and, well, horrifying. You brush past a tapestry depicting a battle scene so old and faded the details are almost ghostly. For a moment, you think you see movement behind it, just a flutter, but when you lift the heavy fabric, there's only cold stone wall behind. You tell yourself it's the draft. You pass a narrow doorway recessed into the wall, barely noticeable if not for the gleam of worn stone where countless hands have brushed it before. A service passage, no doubt, likely used by servants to move unseen from the kitchens to the hall, bearing platters of meat and goblets of wine. Historians still debate the extent to which these passages were designed for discretion versus defense, but in practice, they served both purposes. And tonight, it looks like your best shot. You duck into the passage. It's cramped, the ceiling's so low you have to stoop. The floor is uneven, and the walls close in, the air damp and stale. But ahead, a faint glow promises salvation. You inch forward. A sudden rustling sound behind you makes you jump, probably another goat, you tell yourself firmly. Still, you quicken your pace, heart thudding in your chest. The passage turns sharply, and you stumble through an archway, and out into a small side chamber just off the great hall. You can hear the laughter clearly now, the clatter of plates and the murmur of conversation. You straighten your robes, lift your chin, and adjust the drooping crown. Time to make your entrance. You stride toward the hall, and smack face first into a pillar you somehow failed to see. A breathless curse escapes your lips before you can stop it, and you glance around, hoping no one heard. Fortunately, the din from the hall masks your indignity. You rub your nose, which is surely redder than your royal seal by now, and continue, slower this time, weaving carefully between obstacles. It's a small comfort that others have fallen prey to similar blunders. King John was rumored to have gotten lost in his own strongholds more than once. And though the chroniclers are suspiciously quiet on the specifics, probably out of loyalty or sheer pity, you suspect you were not the first monarch to spend an evening wandering through what was supposed to be his invincible home. You reach a set of heavy doors that lead directly into the great hall. Voices swell on the other side, a sea of merriment and clanking goblets. You pause, take a deep breath, straighten your robes once more, and push the doors open. The hall goes quiet for a moment as heads turn toward you. You stride in, cobwebs clinging to your sleeves, dust smudging the hem of your robes, and a single, rebellious tuft of goat hair stuck to your crown. Majesty, in all its splendor. The silence in the hall lasts just a beat too long to be comfortable. You can feel the collective intake of breath as dozens of courtiers take in your appearance, the dust, the disheveled robes, the hair out of place, the unmistakable smudge of something suspiciously hoof-shaped on the hem of your cloak. And then, mercifully, the noise returns. Goblets are raised once again, conversation resumes, but now you catch the suppressed smirks, the sidelong glances. No one dares laugh outright, of course. You're still the king, still a figure crowned by divine right. But you're also now a walking cautionary tale, the ruler who couldn't find his own feast. You shuffle toward your high-backed chair at the dais, a parade of muffled snickers and hastily disguised grins following your every step. As you approach, a servant discreetly attempts to dust off your shoulders with a corner of his apron, but you wave him off. Pride insists on carrying the evening's disasters with you, like a badge of honor. Or at least, a badge of survivable embarrassment. You collapse into your throne, feigning regal composure, and signal for wine. A goblet is placed in your hand. You grip it tightly, grateful for the prop. A sip, cool, sharp, a little sour, steadies your nerves. It's not the finest vintage in your cellar, but it'll do. Historians still argue whether kings were truly seen as infallible by their subjects or if, deep down, everyone knew rulers were as prone to folly as anyone else. You suspect the latter, judging by the restrained mirth barely hidden behind jeweled sleeves and feathered caps tonight. As you sit there, pretending to be deeply engrossed in some roast peacock on a silver platter, you can't help but reflect on the ridiculousness of it all. Here you are, king of the most powerful realm in Europe, and you've been bested by your own castle's corridors. You glance around, suddenly seeing the hall with new eyes. Castles were supposed to be monuments to strength and authority, yes, but also to bewilderment. The kitchen's tucked away behind twisting passages. The servant doors cleverly concealed. The battlements looping around like the world's least enjoyable walking path. All of it designed to defend, to confuse, to delay. And delay it had. A mainstream fact, medieval castles weren't just defensive structures, they were also political statements. Towers tall enough to be seen for miles, walls thick enough to withstand weeks of siege, all a very public reminder of who held power. But the interiors? They were for survival, not show. Winding halls and trap-like staircases were just as important as the moat or the drawbridge. You take another sip of wine, feeling it warm your insides. A glance down the hall reveals the heads of your advisors clustered together, murmuring. No doubt already crafting the story of tonight's misadventure. By morning, there will be rumors. In one version, you heroically inspected the fortifications. In another, you wandered in search of a lone assassin, an assassin who suspiciously resembled a goat, perhaps. In yet another, already the favorite, judging by the glint in your steward's eye, you simply got lost. You set down your goblet and stifle a sigh. Better to laugh with them than let them laugh at you, you reason. Leaning back, you lift your voice just enough to be heard by the nearest table. Next time, you say dryly, I'll bring a map. The hall erupts in laughter, real, unguarded laughter, and just like that, the tension breaks. Courtiers raise their goblets in salute. The minstrels strike up a jaunty tune. Plates clatter and conversation swells once more. Humor, you remind yourself, is a king's most underrated weapon. You settle back into your throne, letting the noise wash over you. The smell of roasting meats, sweet wine, and wood smoke fills the air, mingling with the remnants of your adventure, the scent of dust, of stone, of slight humiliation. Quirky tidbit, some castles had entire rooms devoted to the art of laughter, called merriment chambers, where jesters and fools performed solely to keep the court entertained and the king's mood light. You think you've just created your own impromptu merriment chamber tonight. As the feast continues, you can't help but smile. You've survived worse than this, after all. And if history has taught you anything, it's that even the gravest blunders can be spun into legend. The doors to the hall remain open, and beyond them, the darkened corridors yawn invitingly. You think, just for a moment, of venturing back in, proving to yourself that you can master the maze. Then you glance down at your robes, at the stubborn goat hairs still clinging to the velvet. No. Best not tempt fate twice in one evening. You shift in your throne, feeling the lingering dampness from your earlier skirmish with the castle's less glamorous corners. Your toes are still slightly numb from the chill, your knees a bit stiff from too much stumbling, and yet somehow, you're more relaxed than when the evening began. There's a strange comfort in the hum of conversation, the clatter of platters, and the quiet knowledge that, for now, no one expects you to give speeches or settle disputes. The thick stone walls, so menacing in the dark, now seem almost cozy under the warm haze of candlelight. The smoke from the hearths curls lazily upward, blending with the golden glow. A minstrel strums a lute near the dais, singing a song about a lovesick knight who wandered too far into an enchanted forest. You suspect a few cheeky courtiers are already swapping the forest for a castle and the knight for a certain king. You tap your fingers lightly on the armrest, contemplating the labyrinthine madness that led you here. You weren't the first to lose your way inside a fortress, and you certainly wouldn't be the last. Why were castles so intentionally bewildering? Couldn't the builders have spared a thought for royal convenience? The answer, of course, is no. Castle architecture wasn't about making life easy. It was about defense, about survival. The very disorientation that had you bumping into walls and goats tonight was a tactical choice. Invaders who breached the gates would face the same confounding halls, slowing their advance and scattering their forces. A mainstream fact, the Normans, those enthusiastic castle builders after 1066, were notorious for their emphasis on strategic design. Keeps were set atop moats, artificial hills that gave defenders a height advantage. Walls were staggered, stairs twisted, and even courtyards were often uneven to trip up attackers. Your wandering wasn't a flaw, it was a feature. A fringe tidbit? Some castle architects deliberately inserted architectural red herrings, doors that led to walls, stairways that went nowhere, or even entire rooms without entrances from the main floor. These spaces confused invaders, yes, but they also provided secret nooks for ambushes and hiding treasures. Historians still argue whether these quirks were always deliberate or if, as some suggest, they were happy accidents born from the chaotic realities of medieval construction, where plans changed mid-build due to warfare, funding issues, or the occasional plague outbreak. You glance toward the upper galleries where tapestries flutter faintly with the draft. Somewhere behind those walls, more secret stairwells and passageways twist unseen. You shudder at the thought of venturing back in. You realize, with a wry smile, that part of your castle is a living puzzle, one designed centuries ago with no thought for your future frustration. These walls have seen invaders, sieges, betrayals, perhaps even the occasional ghost, but they've never seen a king so thoroughly bested by his own hallways. You rub the bridge of your nose, where the faint ache from colliding with that pillar still lingers. Perhaps the architects had a point. A simple floor plan might have spared you tonight's embarrassment, but it would also have made your fortress easier to conquer. Still, you can't help but imagine a world with a few helpful signs. King's quarters, this way. Great hall, 2 rights, 1 left. Or even just a helpful goat to lead the way. Your steward approaches, bowing low. He's careful not to smile, but you can see the amusement dancing in his eyes. "Sire," he murmurs, "would you care for more wine?" You nod, grateful for the excuse to keep your hands busy. As he pours, you catch a glimpse of your reflection in the polished silver of the goblet. Your crown is askew, your hair hopelessly mussed. For a moment, you contemplate fixing it, but then decide against it. Why bother? Let them see a king who can laugh at himself. It's not as if a disheveled appearance ever stopped a monarch from being remembered. Look at Richard the Lionheart, famous for bravery, but also notorious for vanity about his hair. Or Henry VIII, who spent a fortune on clothing even while his political alliances crumbled. You, too, will have your legacy. Perhaps not as the most fearsome king. Maybe not even as the wisest. But certainly as the one who turned a navigational fiasco into a feast's entertainment. You lift the goblet in a toast, half to your court and half to yourself. To those who find their way, you say, and to those who take the scenic route. A ripple of laughter follows, warmer and more genuine this time. Even the knights chuckle, their mail clinking softly. You lean back, content, as the minstrels strike up a livelier tune. Outside the hall's warmth, the castle waits, its corridors dark and twisting, full of secrets and stories. But tonight, you'll let them wait. The hall hums with life, a stark contrast to the brooding silence of the castle's inner labyrinth. You sit a little taller in your throne, feeling the warmth seep back into your bones, the embarrassment of earlier now reduced to a pleasant anecdote rippling through the tables. You've become tonight's entertainment without needing to lift a sword or wage a battle. just a crown, a robe, and a thoroughly confusing architectural marvel. You watch as platters of roasted venison and glazed fruit circulate, servants weaving expertly between the crowded tables. The familiar scents of cinnamon, clove, and roasted meat wrap around you like a heavy blanket. Your stomach, empty from your unintended expedition, growls audibly, but you're too comfortable to move just yet. Let the feast come to you. After all, you've earned it. As you wait, your mind drifts back to the earlier confusion. It really is impressive, you muse, how a building could turn itself into such an effective weapon without a single arrow being loosed. Historians still argue about whether the most baffling features of castles were built strategically or if they evolved naturally through centuries of expansion, renovation, and the occasional reckless whim of a reigning monarch. Some insist it was all intentional, others point to the chaotic floor plans of places like Windsor Castle and argue that, sometimes, medieval builders were just winging it. A mainstream fact, castles weren't static structures. They grew and changed with each new ruler, each new war, each new need. Towers were added, courtyards enclosed, chapels built, dungeons expanded. What began as a simple motte and bailey could, over generations, become a sprawling fortress city, a honeycomb of passageways, stairs, chambers, and traps. Quirky tidbit, some castles had entire networks of hidden passages not only for escape but also for clandestine trysts, secret deliveries, and unsanctioned late-night feasts. There are even records of tunnels used by bakers to sneak forbidden spices into the kitchens during wartime shortages, proof that when people want cake, they'll dig for it. You lean back, watching the flickering torchlight dance along the vaulted ceilings. Those arches, those massive stones, how had they even managed to build them without modern cranes or steel scaffolding? Medieval masons, working with crude tools and sheer will, hauled each block into place, often by hand. The enormity of it strikes you. Castles weren't just homes or fortresses, they were living, breathing monuments to the ambition, the stubbornness, and yes, the confusion of their builders. You glance at the courtiers arrayed before you. Most are well-fed, well-dressed, and well aware of their good fortune to be feasting in your company rather than huddling in a damp village hut. They laugh easily tonight, emboldened by the wine and the general giddiness of a king caught out by his own home. But even they know, underneath the jokes and the easy smiles, that the castle's design wasn't merely for grandeur. It was survival made stone. You're distracted by a commotion at the far end of the hall. A group of knights, already 3 goblets deep into the evening, are arguing animatedly, gesturing wildly toward the walls. One slams his fist onto the table, another laughs so hard he nearly topples his chair. You can't hear every word, but you catch snippets. Bet you couldn't find the garderobe in less than an hour, and blindfolded next time. Ah. The evening's entertainment is evolving. It seems your misadventure has inspired a competition, a race through the castle's corridors, perhaps, or a challenge to find the kitchens without getting hopelessly turned around. You shake your head with a smile. Leave it to knights, men trained in the art of siegecraft and warfare, to turn simple navigation into sport. A steward approaches again, this time bearing a platter laden with delicacies, spiced duck, candied figs, and a fresh trencher loaf still steaming from the oven. You take a piece of the bread, tear it apart thoughtfully. Warmth seeps into your fingertips, grounding you. For a moment, you consider ordering some changes to the castle, signs, maybe, or a map carved into the stone of the Great Hall. But the thought dissipates as quickly as it came. What would be the point? The confusion is part of the charm, and part of the defense. You take a bite of the bread, crisp crust, soft center, a hint of honey, and savor the simple pleasure. No goat hair, no damp stone, no hidden stairwells. Just a king, a meal, and the satisfaction of having survived his own castle's many tricks. You glance back toward the doors you entered through earlier. Beyond them lies the twisting maze of corridors, silent and waiting. Another time, perhaps. For now, you'll stay here, among the warmth and the laughter, firmly rooted in the one part of the castle where you are truly master. And if the urge to explore returns, well, next time, you'll bring better shoes. You tear another piece from the trencher loaf, chewing thoughtfully as you watch the hall fill with rising laughter and drunken wagers. The knights are now in full contest mode, daring each other to blindfolded dashes. Through the corridors, an endeavor you suspect will end in bruised chins and even more bruised egos before the night is done. The servants are trying, and failing, not to snicker as they clear away empty platters and refill goblets. You catch one young page glancing at you with wide eyes, quickly averting his gaze the moment you look back. No doubt he's already rehearsing how he'll tell this story to his children someday, the night the king became just another lost soul in the castle maze. You can't really blame him. It's not every evening a monarch blunders his way into the legends of the kitchen staff. A mainstream fact, medieval castles weren't just fortresses for battle, they were miniature cities, complete with their own social hierarchies and microeconomies. A single large castle might house hundreds of people, soldiers, servants, cooks, masons, jesters, and all their families. Living within those thick walls meant living in a society structured as tightly as the stone that enclosed it. Of course, having that many people bustling around made it even harder to keep track of where you were going. The castle at peak hours would have been alive with movement, torches flickering, booths scuffing, gossip buzzing, the clatter of pots and weapons. Navigating it in daylight with a full staff was a challenge. At night, with the halls empty and the torches sputtering low, it was like wandering through the belly of a sleeping giant. Historians still argue whether this bustling, confusing setup was just the byproduct of practicality or if there was a deeper psychological tactic at play. Some believe the very act of overwhelming the senses with sights, sounds, and smells created a kind of controlled chaos, one that could wear down would-be attackers and keep defenders sharp. You, of course, can personally attest to the wearing down part. You sip your wine again, the liquid catching the torchlight as you tilt the goblet. Maybe that's why some kings preferred to rule from palaces rather than castles, spacious, airy palaces where you could see the sun, where the corridors were broad and well lit, and where you didn't risk being upstaged by a goat. Quirky tidbit, one particularly paranoid medieval ruler, King Edward I, was so obsessed with defense that he designed concentric castles, walls within walls, multiple moats, layers upon layers of security. Beaumaris Castle, his perfect fortress, was a marvel of military architecture, and, not coincidentally, a nightmare for anyone trying to find the throne room without a guide. You lean back, letting your head tip slightly against the carved wood of your throne. The crown shifts precariously but, by some miracle, stays perched atop your head. You resist the urge to adjust it. Let it sit crooked, it feels more honest that way tonight. The minstrels strike up a softer tune now, a melody low and lilting, meant to soothe the wine-heavy crowd toward a more drowsy contentment. A few courtiers drift away from the tables, seeking corners to murmur secrets or plot alliances, or perhaps simply to find a quiet spot to sleep off their indulgence. You feel the weight of the night settle over you. It's been a long day, even longer now that you've earned the dubious honor of being the first king in recent memory to play hide-and-seek with his own walls. You toy with the goblet in your hand, watching the flickering reflections ripple across the polished surface. And you wonder, did the great kings before you ever feel this small, this human, inside their grand stone fortresses? Did William the Conqueror ever trip over a loose flagstone? Did Richard the Lionheart ever lose his way between the Great Hall and his chambers? Historians still debate whether the grandeur of kingship was ever enough to fully insulate a man from his own blunders. Tonight, it feels doubtful. But maybe that's not a bad thing. There's something almost comforting in the idea that, no matter how many crowns you wear or castles you build, you're still bound by the same human follies as everyone else. You, too, can get lost. You, too, can stumble. You, too, can find yourself nose to nose with a goat in the middle of the night. Another thought occurs to you. Tomorrow, your advisors will urge you to spin tonight's adventure into a tale of heroism. They'll suggest you frame it as an inspection of the castle's defenses, an act of vigilance and bravery. They'll polish the edges until it shines. But you, sitting here among the crumpled remains of your dignity and a well-roasted duck, know the truth. And oddly, you don't mind it one bit. You lift your goblet again, a silent toast to the crooked halls, the secret passages, the mischievous goats, and most of all, to the castle itself, the great, confusing, beautiful monster that bested you. You set the goblet down with a small, satisfying clink, the sound barely audible over the growing murmur of the hall. The atmosphere has mellowed, the frenetic energy of earlier now replaced with the languid ease that only good wine and full bellies can bring. A few courtiers are slumped in their chairs, deep in what they surely believe to be profound discussions about taxes or tournaments or the relative merits of various hunting dogs. You, however, find your gaze drifting again toward the heavy oak doors at the far end of the hall, the ones you stumbled through not so long ago. Beyond them lies the rest of the castle, a labyrinth of stone, shadow, and time. A place that, if you're honest, has humbled you more thoroughly tonight than any battle ever could. The thought of re-entering that maze tempts you, absurd as it sounds. Maybe it's stubbornness. Maybe it's pride. Maybe it's the third goblet of wine working its magic. But part of you bristles at the idea of being beaten so easily. You're the king, after all. Still, you stay put. The throne is comfortable. The hall is warm. And for now, the castle can keep its secrets. Castles were designed to outlast men like you. That was the whole point. Long after your reign ends, long after your name fades from the lips of your subjects, these stones will remain. Cold, unfeeling, but steadfast. A mainstream fact, the average medieval castle took decades to complete. Some, like Windsor, evolved over centuries. Generations of masons laid stone upon stone, often without seeing the final result in a lifetime. Castles were built for endurance, not convenience, meant to defy the ravages of time and siege alike. You lean an elbow on the throne's wide armrest, idly tracing the worn carvings beneath your fingertips. Even here, even on your seat of power, you're just another momentary figure in the castle's long history. The realization is oddly soothing. And then there's the quirky fact you can't get out of your mind. Some castles, like Carlaverock in Scotland, were built with triangular layouts, only 3 sides to defend, but triple the confusion for invaders. They defied expectations, just as the walls around you had defied your every attempt to navigate them. Historians still argue whether these innovations were strokes of genius or desperate improvisations. Some maintain that the odd designs were purely tactical. Others argue they were the result of stubborn nobles demanding castles built atop uncooperative terrain. Either way, the castles endured, confusing friend and foe alike. You stifle a yawn, blinking slowly. The hall feels softer now, the firelight more golden, the laughter more distant. The heavy food, the wine, and the sheer exertion of your unintended tour weigh down your limbs. A good king knows when to act. A wise king knows when to rest. You glance again at the knights who had wagered on finding their way blindfolded. One particularly bold soul is being spun around by his companions, a cloth tied over his eyes, arms stretched out in front of him like some grotesque, armored marionette. He stumbles forward, bumping into a pillar, bouncing off with a grunt, and staggering into a serving boy who nearly drops a tray of roast capon. The hall bursts into laughter. You can't help but chuckle, the sound low and genuine. There's something wonderfully democratic about a castle's indifference. It doesn't care about crowns or titles. It doesn't distinguish between kings and knights and kitchen boys. Within these walls, all are equally prone to bumping into doors, getting lost, and ending up with goat hair clinging to their dignity. You push yourself upright, the throne creaking softly in protest. A few heads turn, conversations pausing as they watch you. You give a small wave, nothing too grand, and step down from the dais. You walk slowly through the hall, savoring the feel of the flagstones under your slippers. They're worn smooth by countless feet, soldiers, servants, kings long forgotten. Your shadow stretches before you, flickering with each step as it crosses the patchy pools of candlelight. You make your way to a side door, not the main entrance, not the way you came, but a smaller, humbler portal tucked behind a heavy tapestry. You pull it aside and find yourself facing a narrow staircase curling downward. A shortcut to the royal chambers. Or at least, it's supposed to be. Historians still debate the number of secret staircases hidden within old castles. Some believe there are dozens, some hundreds, some so well concealed they've never been rediscovered. Hidden doors, false walls, stairs that spiral up into nothing, the lore is endless. You hesitate, the memory of your earlier misadventures fresh. But then you smile. You're not afraid of a few stairs. Not tonight. Tugging your robe clear of your feet, you begin your descent, the stone steps cool and familiar underfoot. The hall fades behind you, swallowed by the comforting gloom of the stairwell. If you get lost again, so be it. At least you'll know you're in good company. The staircase is narrower than you remembered. Or perhaps it's just that tonight, every passage seems smaller, darker, more intimate. You descend carefully, one hand brushing the damp wall, the other gathering your robe lest you trip and turn this quiet retreat into a royal avalanche. The air down here is cooler, tinged with the scent of stone, old wood, and something else, something metallic and faintly unpleasant. You wrinkle your nose. The castle has its secrets, and not all of them smell like fresh bread and wine. The steps spiral sharply, disorienting even without blindfolds or drunken wagers. You lose count around the 30th turn, your sense of direction twisting into knots. Up becomes down, right becomes left. A maze within a maze. Historians still argue whether such hidden stairwells were designed to confuse enemies or simply to allow lords and ladies discreet movement. Probably both. A mainstream fact, secret passages were a hallmark of medieval castles, but they weren't always built with escape in mind. Some were purely practical, allowing servants to move unseen, preserving the illusion of effortless royal life. A fringe tidbit, a few castles had secret chapels tucked deep within, hidden sanctuaries for prayer in times of siege, or, in some cases, clandestine meetings. You wonder, idly, if you'll stumble into one of those tonight, mistaking a hidden chapel for a shortcut to your bedchamber. The stairs finally spill you into a narrow hallway, barely lit by a single flickering torch set high in a bracket. The light casts long, thin shadows that slither along the floor, wavering as you move. The walls here are rougher, the stones less polished. This isn't a place meant for royal feet. This is the castle's skeleton, its backstage. You move forward cautiously, the soft slap of your slippers the only sound. At least, you tell yourself it's the only sound. It's hard to be sure with the wind hissing faintly through unseen cracks, the stones groaning softly under their ancient weight. You pass a series of heavy wooden doors, each bound in black iron. Some are ajar, revealing shadowed storerooms filled with sacks of grain, barrels of wine, bundles of old banners and broken shields. The detritus of kingdom maintenance. It's humbling, really, to realize that the business of ruling relies as much on sacks of turnips and barrels of pickled fish as it does on laws and armies. Your torch gives a final sputter and dies, leading you in near darkness. You pause, waiting for your eyes to adjust, and then press on. The corridor bends sharply, always a good trick to slow down enemies or, apparently, disoriented monarchs. You reach a fork. Of course you do. One path slopes slightly downward, the air growing colder, heavier. The other ascends, the faint smell of smoke and tallow candles drifting toward you. You hesitate, weighing your options. Down likely leads to the cellars, maybe the dungeons. Up should lead to the kitchens, or, with luck, the royal chambers. You choose up. The climb is slow. The stairs are uneven, worn from centuries of use, each one a slightly different height, a deliberate trap for the unwary. Castles were good at this, turning the ordinary into obstacles. Historians still debate whether the uneven stairs were intentional or just the result of hasty construction and poor tools. Some argue it was a tactical choice, forcing invaders to slow down, stumble, expose themselves to defenders stationed above. You stumble yourself, catching your balance with a muttered curse that echoes embarrassingly loud in the tight space. You freeze, heart hammering, listening for any reaction. Nothing. Just the steady drip of water somewhere unseen and the soft sigh of the wind. You continue upward, slower now. Finally, mercifully, you reach another door. It's small, unadorned, a simple slab of oak reinforced with iron. No heraldic crests, no carved flourishes. A service door, meant for the invisible laborers who kept your kingdom running while you played at power. You push it open. Warmth washes over you, along with the blessed scent of beeswax and fresh rushes. The corridor beyond is wider, better lit, lined with torches and gleaming holders. The floors are clean, the walls hung with faded but once grand tapestries. You're back. Almost. You recognize this hallway. The royal chambers lie just around the bend. You can already imagine the feel of the thick woolen coverlet, the heavy velvet drapes drawn tight against the night, the quiet crackle of the fire laid in the hearth by unseen hands. You move forward, exhaustion pulling at your limbs. Each step feels heavier than the last, but the thought of rest spurs you on. As you round the corner, you nearly collide with a figure emerging from a side door. A kitchen boy, barely more than a child, freezes at the sight of you. His eyes widen comically, his mouth opening and closing without sound. You must look a sight, robes askew, hair wild, face smudged with the soot of extinguished torches and the dust of forgotten corridors. The boy's gaze darts to your crown, still perched, barely, on your head. For a moment, you both stand there, locked in mutual surprise. Then the boy bows so quickly and so deeply that he nearly topples over. "Sire," he squeaks, voice cracking with terror and reverence. You wave a hand wearily. "Carry on," you murmur, and continue toward your chambers, dignity tattered but intact. Behind you, you hear the boys scamper off, no doubt racing to be the first to tell the kitchen staff about his midnight encounter with a very rumpled king. You can already hear the jokes forming. You finally reach your chamber doors, tall, oaken things banded with iron and carved with scenes of past royal glories, hunting parties, grand battles, parades of subjects with faces worn smooth by centuries of touch and time. You rest your palm against the cold metal handle, feeling the faint vibrations of your pulse in your fingertips. It's tempting, standing here, to imagine you've won. That the castle, this snarling stone beast with its tricks and traps, has finally yielded to you. But you know better. You haven't conquered anything. You've merely survived. You push open the doors. The air inside is warm, welcoming. A fire crackles in the hearth, casting long shadows on the thick rush-strewn floor. Heavy velvet curtains are drawn tightly across the windows, muffling the sounds of the wind outside. A few beeswax candles sputter softly on iron sconces, their light rich and golden. You step inside and close the doors behind you with a soft thud. The chamber swallows you whole, the outside world fading away. Here, at least, you are the undisputed master, though, given the evening's events, even that feels like a generous title. A mainstream fact, royal bedchambers were not just places of rest, they were political stages. Councils were held, treaties negotiated, and sometimes even official audiences given within these private rooms. The concept of privacy, as you understand it today, didn't really exist for a medieval monarch. Walls could talk, or at least, the people behind them could. You strip off your heavy robe, tossing it onto a carved chair near the fire. Dust rises from the fabric, illuminated in the candlelight. You pull the crown from your head and set it on a low table with a soft clink, the metal strangely humble without its usual pomp. It's odd how such a small thing, a circle of gold, a few embedded gems, can weigh so much. Tonight, without it, you feel lighter. Not freer, exactly, but less burdened. Less trapped by expectation. A fringe tidbit floats to mind. Some medieval kings, weary of the pressures of rule, would slip away from court disguised as commoners, wandering among their people to experience life without crowns or titles. Henry V was said to have walked among the crowds before battles, listening to the fears and hopes of his soldiers. Perhaps they, too, needed a reminder that even kings are just men underneath all the ceremony. You sit heavily on the edge of the vast bed, its thick wool blankets and linen sheets promising the kind of comfort that even a throne cannot provide. You tug off your slippers, one damp from a puddle, the other suspiciously scuffed, and stretch your toes toward the fire. The warmth seeps into your skin, loosening muscles tightened by the night's misadventures. You lean back on your hands, staring into the flames. Historians still argue whether the grandiosity of royal life was a genuine expression of power or a carefully crafted illusion to maintain it. The reality, you suspect, lies somewhere in between. Majesty is a performance, and every performance needs a stage. Castles, with their towering walls and twisting halls, were part of the set. You lie back fully now, the bed creaking under your weight. Above you, the heavy wooden canopy is carved with interlocking vines and beasts, an entire miniature world hidden just out of easy sight. You trace one pattern absently with your eyes, following the twists and turns until it disappears into shadow. Somewhere, deep in the belly of the castle, the night continues. Winds whistle through unseen cracks. Mice scurry behind the stone walls. Servants move quietly along secret passages. And the castle endures, indifferent to your presence, as it has endured for centuries before you and will for centuries after. You sigh, long and low, and let your eyes close. You survived your castle tonight. Barely. But the real victory isn't in finding your way back or saving face at the feast. It's in knowing that you are part of something bigger, something vast and ancient and mercilessly confusing. The castle doesn't care if you are king. It doesn't care if you are lost. It simply is. You smile faintly, the fire's warmth pulling you deeper into the soft embrace of sleep. Outside your chamber door, faint footsteps pass in the hallway, another lost soul, perhaps, or merely a servant on their nightly rounds. You don't open your eyes to check. Let the castle have its secrets. Let it weave its endless web of stone and shadow. Tonight, you'll dream of straight hallways and open doors. You wake slowly, blinking against the dim light filtering through the thick velvet curtains. For a moment, you don't move, caught between dream and waking, the events of the previous night still lingering at the edge of memory like mist over a moat. You stretch cautiously, half expecting the stiffness of yesterday's misadventures to punish you. Instead, You're surprised to find only a pleasant ache, the kind that reminds you you're still very much alive. Somewhere beyond the curtains, the castle breathes its morning sighs, creaking timbers, the shuffle of early servants, the faint call of distant gulls. You sit up slowly, the heavy bedclothes pooling around you. There's a moment of peace, fragile and rare, before the duties of kingship come crashing back. A knock sounds at the door. You groan, rubbing a hand over your face, and summon a voice that sounds more awake than you feel. Enter. A steward slips in, bowing low. He carries a silver tray with a covered dish and a goblet of watered wine. Breakfast. The unspoken rule of the court is clear. The king must begin the day looking more composed than he feels. Especially today. You lift the cover to reveal a modest meal. Poached eggs, a slice of soft cheese, a small hunk of bread still warm from the kitchens. No grand feast this morning. Just the basics. You nod approval and the steward retreats without a word, though you catch the faintest twitch of a smile at the corners of his mouth. No doubt, the kitchen boy wasted no time spreading the story of your nighttime wanderings. By now, the whole castle probably knows. Maybe the village beyond the walls too. You take a bite of bread and chuckle softly to yourself. Historians still argue whether medieval kings cultivated a certain mystique deliberately, hiding their flaws behind ceremony and spectacle. Some say kingship was a carefully crafted mask, others claim it was a desperate scramble to hold onto authority in a world teetering on the edge of chaos. You suspect it's a bit of both. Authority is a dance, and even the most powerful rulers must sometimes trip over their own feet and their own corridors. As you eat, you glance toward a nearby table where your crown rests, dull in the muted morning light. Last night it seemed heavier, but now, in the clarity of dawn, it looks almost innocent. Just a piece of metal and stone. Meaningless without the weight of the head that bears it. A quirky tidbit surfaces in your mind. King Charles VI of France once believed he was made of glass and feared shattering at any moment. He even wore reinforced clothing to protect himself. Royalty, it seems, has always come with its peculiar burdens. You finish your meal, toss back the last of the wine, and swing your legs out of bed. The floor is cold against your bare feet, the stones still holding the chill of the night. You dress slowly, choosing plain woolen robes today, no need to pile on the pageantry. Simpler garb for a king who had a humbler journey than most. When you're ready, you move toward the doors, pausing for a heartbeat before lifting the crown. It's heavier than you remember, or maybe you're just remembering differently now. You set it atop your head, the familiar weight settling against your brow. A reminder. A warning. You pull open the door and step out into the corridor. Servants freeze mid-step, bowing hastily. You nod and continue on, each step echoing in the narrow space. The castle seems less menacing this morning, its corridors no longer a web but a framework, supportive, not entrapping. Or perhaps you've simply learned to walk with the maze instead of against it. Historians still debate whether kings saw their castles as prisons or sanctuaries. Most likely, they were both. Fortress and home. Weapon and shield. Like the crown, the castle was as much a burden as it was a blessing. You pass familiar tapestries, familiar suits of armor. Even the goat from last night has been rounded up, judging by the faint trail of straw left behind. You smirk. The castle may have claimed your pride temporarily, but not your humor. You reach the Great Hall, the same place where your misadventure ended hours ago. The doors stand open, and inside, the court has already gathered, advisors, knights, ladies-in-waiting, all pretending to be absorbed in their duties while sneaking glances at you. You pause at the threshold. Last night, you stumbled in as the punchline of your own story. Today, you'll enter as its author. You stride forward, head high, crown slightly askew, because why not lean into the inevitable? A king who can laugh at himself rules a kingdom less likely to laugh behind his back. You ascend the dais and turn to face your court. They watch you, silent, expectant. You clear your throat, the sound cutting cleanly through the charged air. Well, you say with a wry smile, I trust everyone enjoyed last night's tour of the castle. A ripple of chuckles. A few brave souls allow themselves full laughter. You continue, voice steady, easy. For those keeping score, the final tally was 6 wrong turns, 1 goat encounter, and precisely 0 assassins found lurking in the hallways. A relief, I'm sure. The laughter swells, genuine now. The tension breaks. You let it linger before lifting a hand to quiet the room. We may build castles to defend against enemies, you say, more seriously, but sometimes, it's the walls we know best that test us most. A beat of silence. Thoughtful nods. A few approving murmurs. You sit, feeling not defeated but strangely triumphant. You have survived the castle's gauntlet and emerged not lessened, but humanized. Outside, the morning sun catches the highest towers, gilding them in pale gold. The castle, vast and ancient, stands indifferent to your struggles and your victories. But today, it feels a little more like home. The great hall hums back to life around you, conversations picking up as the court settles into its usual rhythm of plotting, petitioning, and gossiping, none of which can ever fully be silenced, only directed like a stream bending around a rock. You sit back, letting the noise wash over you, a steady, familiar tide. The castle itself seems to sigh in relief, as though satisfied that its latest game has played out. The walls, once oppressive, now feel merely ancient, the floor, once treacherous, now simply worn by time and footfall. You glance out across the hall, noting the faces gathered here, the old knight whose loyalty is as unshakable as the stone pillars, the steward whose eyes miss nothing, the cluster of ladies whispering behind jeweled fans. They all know. And yet they stay. Loyalty, you think, isn't earned by perfection. It's earned by resilience, and maybe, sometimes, a little humility. A mainstream fact, castles were never just military installations. They were centers of administration and governance, microcosms of the kingdom itself. From here, edicts were issued, justice dispensed, taxes levied. A castle was as much about power as it was about protection. Lose the respect of the court, and you risk losing control of the kingdom. You let your gaze wander up toward the rafters, dark beams crisscrossing high above. They're ancient, some warped with age, others repaired and replaced countless times. You wonder how many kings before you sat in this very spot, stared at this very ceiling, and thought similar thoughts, how to hold a kingdom together when sometimes even holding yourself together feels like a feat. Historians still argue whether the allure of castle life, the feasts, the tournaments, the pageantry, was a genuine reflection of royal grandeur or a distraction from the grinding reality of medieval politics. Probably both. The spectacle was necessary, yes, but so was the quiet, relentless work behind it. A fringe tidbit, some castles had listening walls, hidden architectural features where hollow space behind stone allowed sounds to carry, enabling spies to eavesdrop on conversations in seemingly private rooms. You wonder now if last night, while you stumbled through the dark corridors, someone had been listening, laughing softly to themselves. Your steward approaches once more, bowing low. Sire, the council awaits your pleasure. Of course they do. The kingdom never sleeps, even when the king needs to. You rise, robes swishing softly around your ankles, and descend the dais. The court parts before you, heads bowing, and you pass among them with steady steps. Some lift their eyes as you go, meeting your gaze briefly, offering small nods or sly, knowing smiles. No mocking, no malice, just the subtle acknowledgement of a shared story. You move through the hall toward the council chamber, past tall windows that offer a glimpse of the castle's sprawling courtyard below. Servants scurry about their morning tasks, soldiers drill in neat formations, stable boys chase errant horses. Life, stubborn and insistent, goes on. You pass through an archway and into a narrower corridor, the stones here older, rougher. You know these halls better now. Or perhaps you simply accept that you will never know them entirely, and that acceptance makes the difference. Another mainstream fact, castles evolved constantly, often built upon older foundations, with new wings added as needs and fashions changed. This layering created complex layouts that could baffle even those who lived in them. A place like this was never truly finished, always shifting, growing, adapting. You run your hand lightly along the wall as you walk, feeling the uneven surface under your fingertips. These stones have seen things, feasts and funerals, weddings and betrayals, victories and humiliations. And yet, they endure. You reach the council chamber and push open the door. Inside, your advisors are already gathered, grim-faced knights, shrewd lords, scribes with ink-stained fingers. They rise as you enter, bowing their heads in solemn greeting. You move to your seat at the head of the long table, a heavy chair carved with lions and vines. As you settle into it, the murmurs fade to silence, and all eyes turn to you. You tap a finger against the polished wood, thinking for a moment of last night, the cold, the darkness, the bewildering halls. And then you smile. Well, you say lightly, before we begin, Perhaps someone could draw me a better map of this place. There's a beat of stunned silence, and then, laughter. Genuine, startled, relieved. Even the stern-faced knight at your right allows a brief chuckle. The tension breaks like a dam giving way. You nod once, satisfied, and gesture for the first petitioner to speak. The business of ruling resumes. Outside, the castle stands watch, its stones soaked in centuries of secrets. It will outlast you, just as it outlasted those before. But for now, it shelters you, challenges you, and, if last night was any proof, humbles you. And maybe that's exactly what a king needs. The morning drags on, as mornings in council tend to do. Petitions are heard, disputes are settled, taxes discussed and argued over. It's the slow, grinding work of governance, the stuff ballads rarely mention, but the stuff that builds kingdoms all the same. You sit, listening, weighing, ruling. It's a different kind of navigation from last night's misadventure, but no less complex. Every decision is a turn in the corridor, every compromise a hidden passage. Get it wrong, and the consequences can be just as bruising. The steward reads out the next matter, a dispute over land boundaries between two minor lords. You listen as they squabble, voices rising like rival songbirds. It's tempting to dismiss them, to wave a hand and be done with it, but you know better. Small things ignored grow into larger ones, like cracks in the castle walls, left unattended until the whole structure threatens to crumble. A mainstream fact. Medieval kingship was less about grand battles and more about managing 1,000 tiny crises. Disputed inheritances, border skirmishes, tax collection, these were the bricks and mortar of royal authority. A king who couldn't master them wouldn't last long, no matter how many castles he built. You lean forward, fingers steepled, and offer a judgment that neither side particularly likes but both must accept. A few murmurs follow, grudging but respectful. Another problem nudged into place, another stone laid in the invisible architecture of your reign. Still, your mind drifts occasionally to the events of last night. The castle's maze-like halls, the cold press of stone, the way your own home turned against you, not out of malice, but simply because it could. Historians still argue about whether kings felt trapped within their own fortresses. Some accounts describe rulers pacing restlessly through their halls, desperate for the open fields, the hunt, the campaign trail. Others found comfort in a stone embrace, drawing strength from the walls that surrounded them. You glance around the council chamber, noting how the morning sun filters through the arrow slits, catching the motes of dust in a lazy, golden haze. The walls here are thick, the air still, almost heavy. Protective, yes, but also isolating. You shift in your seat, a little restless. A quirky tidbit surfaces. At Dover Castle, tunnels were carved deep into the cliffs not just for defense but to provide an escape route should the worst happen. Even in the strongest castles, there was always an exit plan. You wonder if there's a secret tunnel here you've never found. Wouldn't that have been useful last night? The council session finally draws to a close with a summary of incoming tax revenues. Numbers are read aloud, scribes jotting down every figure with brisk efficiency. You nod, dismissing the council with a wave. They rise, bow, and file out, leaving you alone in the chamber with your thoughts. You sit there for a moment longer, letting the quiet settle. Outside the thick walls, life continues, the blacksmith hammering in the courtyard, the washerwomen chattering by the river, the guards calling to one another along the battlements. The castle hums with its eternal, indifferent life. You rise and stretch, feeling the stiffness in your back and legs. The council chamber, for all its importance, is no less a labyrinth than the hallways that ensnared you. Power and responsibility, another set of twisting corridors with no clear exit. You exit the chamber and find yourself once more in the narrow corridors. The light is different now, sharper, more direct, the sun climbing higher. The gloom of night feels distant, almost dreamlike, but the memory of it clings to you. You wander the halls, not aimlessly this time, but without urgency. The castle feels different in daylight, less hostile, more familiar. You nod to passing servants, exchange brief words with the guard captain. You come upon a small, arched window and pause, looking out over the courtyard. Below, squires spar with blunted swords, their laughter ringing off the stone walls. In the stables, grooms brush horses until their coats gleam. Beyond the walls, the village sprawls in tidy chaos, smoke curling from chimneys. You lean against the stone, cool even in the sun, and let yourself be still. Historians still debate whether castles were meant to inspire awe or fear, or perhaps both. To the peasants toiling in the fields, the sight of a towering keep was a reminder of who held power. To the king within, it was a reminder of how precarious that power could be. A goat trots across the courtyard below, oblivious to the weighty matters of state. You can't help but smile. You push off from the window and continue walking. The castle no longer feels like a trap. It feels like what it is, a reflection of the kingdom itself, grand, confusing, sometimes ridiculous, but ultimately resilient. You pass the kitchens, where the smell of baking bread wafts out to greet you. A kitchen boy, the same one from last night, perhaps, spots you and freezes. You offer a small nod, and he relaxes, grinning wide before darting back inside. You turn down another corridor, this one lined with the faded banners of past campaigns. The fabric is frayed, the colors muted by time, but the pride remains stitched into every thread. These halls have seen centuries of kings, each with their victories and failures, their pride and folly. You're merely the latest in a long, winding story. The banners ripple faintly in the drafty corridor as you pass, a silent testament to the endless procession of kings and queens who navigated these same stone veins before you. Some ruled well, some ruled terribly. All of them, it seems, walked these same halls and likely cursed under their breath when they lost their way between the great hall and their bedchambers. You slow your steps, trailing your fingers along the frayed edges of a faded standard. Once it bore a vibrant crimson lion, now it's little more than a ghost of its former self, threads clinging desperately to the past. A mainstream fact, medieval castles weren't built for comfort. Even the grandest of them were cold, drafty, and dark. Tapestries served not just as decoration but as vital insulation, trying to keep the biting chill of stone at bay. Without them, life would have been not just unpleasant but dangerously cold, particularly in the dead of winter. You smile faintly as you move on. No amount of tapestry can fully domesticate a castle. The draft sneaks in anyway, the stones radiate their slow, patient chill, and the walls always feel like they're quietly watching. Historians still argue whether castle life ever truly softened, even in the later centuries. Some point to opulent renovations, larger windows, and more comfortable furnishings as proof of progress. Others insist that a castle could only be so accommodating. Beyond a certain point, the stone would always win. Your footsteps echo softly, a steady rhythm that pulls you deeper into the heart of the keep. The corridors here are older, the stones rougher, the air heavier with the scent of age and smoke. You recognize this wing, the old part of the castle, the original keep around which newer halls and walls were constructed. A quirky tidbit, in many castles, the oldest sections were often the most defensible, and the most haunted, if one were to believe the gossip of kitchen maids and squires. Ghost stories were as much a part of castle life as tournaments and taxes, with tales of spectral knights and weeping ladies in every crumbling stairwell and disused chapel. You chuckle under your breath. After last night, you wouldn't be surprised to hear you'd join the roster of castle spirits, the ghost of a king wandering in circles, forever seeking the great hall. The thought doesn't trouble you. If anything, it feels oddly fitting. You round a corner and find yourself facing a small wooden door, half hidden behind a sagging tapestry. You pause. It looks familiar. With a slow, deliberate movement, you lift the tapestry aside and try the handle. It creaks open, revealing a narrow spiral staircase descending into darkness. You squint, trying to make out the bottom, but it's swallowed by shadow. You remember this place, or think you do. Was this where you tried to find your way back last night? Or is this a different stairwell entirely? Hard to say. They all blur together after a while. You hesitate only briefly before stepping inside. The descent is slow, careful. The air grows cooler with each step, the light dimmer. You pass arrow slits that let in pale slashes of daylight, barely enough to see by. The stone here is rough and pitted, worn down by generations of hurried feet. Halfway down, you pause to catch your breath, one hand braced against the wall. Historians still debate the purpose of these hidden staircases. Some believe they were escape routes, others argue they were built for servants or guards to move quickly and unseen. Either way, they're a reminder that a castle is never quite what it seems. You continue downward until the stairs finally spill out into a small, dusty chamber. It's empty save for a few battered crates and a rusted suit of armor slumped in one corner like a forgotten sentinel. You step forward, brushing dust from a nearby crate with your sleeve. No markings. No clues. Just the remnants of the time when this castle was a fortress on the edge of danger, not just a grand backdrop for courtly life. You move to the suit of armor and crouch down, studying it. The metal is tarnished, the joints frozen with rust. You reach out and, almost without thinking, set the helmet back upright atop the breastplate. The armor tilts precariously but stays there. Even in a place forgotten by time, a little order restored. You straighten and dust off your hands, glancing once more around the room. Nothing more to find here, but somehow, it feels important that you came. Castles aren't just monuments to power or wealth. They're repositories of memory. Every stone, every creak, every worn step tells a story. Some grand, some small. Some about battles won and treaties signed. Others about kings lost in the dark, chasing echoes of their own pride. You turn back toward the stairwell, ready to climb once more. The castle hasn't defeated you. Not really. It's simply reminded you of your place within its labyrinthine heart, not as master, but as custodian. You make your way back up, the steps familiar now, less threatening. The draft still sneaks through the arrow slits. The stones still groan with the weight of centuries. But you climb anyway, sure-footed. At the top of the stairs, you push open the door and step once more into the light. You're not lost. Not anymore. You step into the corridor and breathe deeply. The air up here feels fresher, as though it, too, has climbed from the depths and shaken off the heavy dust of memory. You pull the tapestry back into place, hiding the door behind folds of faded fabric, as though sealing away the past again. The castle stretches before you, familiar and foreign at once. It's the same maze that swallowed you whole last night, but in the daylight, it's lost its menace. The stones are just stones now, the shadows only shadows. You move through the halls at a steady pace, nodding to the occasional servant who crosses your path. Some of them glance quickly away, no doubt remembering the king who battled the castle's corridors, and lost. Others hold your gaze longer, offering the faintest hint of a smile. You wonder if they, too, have gotten turned around at least once in these labyrinthine passageways. It's a quiet bond, the kind only a castle can forge. A mainstream fact, medieval castles weren't static, they evolved constantly, reshaped by war, whim, and necessity. New wings were built onto old keeps, towers were raised or torn down, walls expanded. The result was less a coherent structure and more a palimpsest, a layered record of ambition and anxiety. You brush your hand along the wall where two kinds of stone meet, the smooth blocks of the original keep and the rougher, newer construction from some later renovation. It's a visible seam, a scar marking the castle's slow transformation over generations. Historians still argue whether these changes were driven by practical needs, better defenses, more space, or the egos of the rulers who commissioned them. Perhaps both. A castle, like a kingdom, must adapt or die. You reach a familiar gallery overlooking the courtyard. Below, life carries on undisturbed. Soldiers drill, dogs bark, merchants unload wagons at the kitchen gate. The castle is a living thing, its heart beating steadily despite the chaos, or perhaps because of it. A quirky tidbit, in some castles, particularly large ones, messengers carried painted rods to indicate their purpose and level of urgency. A red rod meant immediate action was required, a blue rod meant important news but no rush. Without these signals, even the king's own commands could get lost in the tangle of halls and courtyards. You imagine sending a red rod after yourself last night. Urgent, king missing in action, possibly somewhere near the kitchens, or the stables, or the dungeon. Please advise. You smile and lean against the windowsill, the sun warming your sleeves. The castle, for all its tricks and traps, has taught you something useful, not just about its own nature, but about ruling. A kingdom isn't a straight corridor from edict to obedience. It's a maze of alliances, rivalries, traditions, and stubborn, unseen forces. There are dead ends and wrong turns, secret passages and sudden pitfalls. Sometimes you get lost. Sometimes you backtrack. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, you find a goat to guide you out. You turn from the window and continue down the corridor, feeling the weight of the crown less heavily today. You know now it's not about mastering the maze. It's about moving through it, resilient, unafraid to look foolish, unafraid to laugh when you do. You pass the chapel, its heavy doors slightly ajar. Inside, a few early risers murmur prayers, their words echoing softly off stone walls. You pause for a moment, listening. It's not reverence that holds you there, exactly, but a sense of connection, a reminder that even kings answer to forces larger than themselves. You slip away before anyone notices. Another corridor bends sharply, and you follow it instinctively, trusting your feet even if your mind has lost track of where exactly you are. You no longer need to know every twist and turn. The castle will lead you where you need to go, or not. Either way, you'll find your path. Historians still debate whether rulers shaped their castles or whether castles shaped their rulers. The truth, you suspect, is that it's a little of both. Just as stone can be hewn and carved, so too can men be molded by the places they inhabit. You find yourself back near the great hall, the heavy doors thrown open to let in the fresh air and noise of the day. A few of your courtiers linger in the doorway, chatting idly. They fall silent as you approach, bowing low. You nod, pausing just long enough to catch a snippet of their conversation, something about the previous night's expedition. You arch an eyebrow, and they straighten hurriedly, faces flushing. Good. Let them laugh. Let them remember. You step into the great hall, the long tables cleared now, servants sweeping and resetting for the evening's meal. The high windows flood the room with light, casting patterns on the worn flagstones. You cross to the dais, your footsteps steady, your shadow trailing behind you like a cloak. You climb the few shallow steps in turn, surveying the space. Last night, it was a theater for your embarrassment. Today, it feels like a stage for something else, a quiet understanding that power is not in never stumbling, but in standing up again, and smiling as you do. The steward approaches with a bow. Sire, will you be joining the hunt this afternoon? You consider. A ride through the open fields, the sun on your face, the wind in your hair. No corridors, no stone walls, no need for a map. You smile. Yes, you say. I believe I will. The steward bows again and departs, leaving you alone on the dais. You glance once more around the hall, the banners, the beams, the endless stone, and feel something you hadn't expected. Gratitude. You survived the castle. And, in a way, the castle helped you survive yourself. By the time the sun reaches its highest point, you are already astride your favorite steed, a sturdy, dappled gray who seems almost as relieved as you to escape the castle's stone embrace. The hunting party gathers in the courtyard, lords in polished leather, ladies in embroidered cloaks, a scattering of squires and hounds yapping and weaving between hooves. You settle into the saddle with ease. Out here, under the vast open sky, the constraints of the castle feel like a distant memory. No walls, no corridors, no wrong turns, only the limitless sprawl of fields and forests, the kingdom stretching to the horizon. A mainstream fact, hunting wasn't merely recreation for medieval monarchs. It was political theater, a display of prowess and dominion. To ride fast, to strike true, to lead the chase, these were metaphors for ruling. A king who hunted well was seen as vigorous, commanding, worthy. You tighten your grip on the reins, the leather worn smooth under your hands, and signal the hunt forward. The gates creak open, and you're the first to gallop through, the wind catching your cloak and tossing it behind you like a battle flag. The hounds surge ahead, noses to the ground, tails high, and the courtiers follow, their laughter and shouts rising in a jubilant chorus. You let the horse have its head, trusting it to find its way as you trusted yourself to find yours last night. Historians still argue whether these grand hunts were practical exercises in skill or elaborate performances meant to dazzle visiting dignitaries and local nobles. Perhaps they were both. Either way, they served their purpose, reinforcing the king's image not just as a ruler, but as a master of all he surveyed. You spur your horse harder, feeling the burning of thighs, the exhilarating rush of speed. Trees blur past, and the air is thick with the scent of crushed grass and damp earth. For a moment, you are no king, no prisoner of stone halls. You are simply a man, flying across the land that has been placed under your rule, feeling the beat of hooves like a drum inside your chest. The quarry, a stag with proud antlers, bursts from a thicket ahead, bounding gracefully across the clearing. The hounds bay wildly, and the chase truly begins. You lean low, urging your mount faster, and the courtiers fall away behind you. It's just you now, the horse, the stag, and the wind. A quirky tidbit comes to mind. Medieval hunting wasn't just about the kill. There were elaborate rituals involved, terms for every movement of the animal, ceremonies for the end of the chase. Unmaking the stag was an act wrapped in layers of tradition and respect, a reminder that even in domination, there must be deference to nature's sovereignty. You smile grimly. There's a lesson in that for rulers too. You angle toward the stag, closing the gap. The creature glances back once, an almost human expression of calculation, and veers left. You follow, the horse shifting seamlessly beneath you, hooves thundering across the uneven ground. Historians still debate whether kings felt truly free during these hunts or if it was just another cage, this time built of ceremony and expectation. You wonder if freedom is ever truly possible for someone in a crown, or if the trick is simply learning how to ride within your boundaries. The chase stretches on, the stag leading you on a winding path through copses of trees and over shallow streams. The other riders are far behind now, their cries faint echoes in the wind. Just as your arm tenses, ready to reach for your hunting spear, the stag wheels sharply, dashing down a narrow, hidden gully. The horse balks, nearly unseating you, but you steady it, turning its head and slowing the pace. You could follow. Push the horse harder, drive the chase to its bloody conclusion. But you don't. You ease back, pulling gently on the reins. The horse slows, snorting and pawing at the ground. You sit back in the saddle and watch as the stag disappears into the trees, a flash of brown and white swallowed by the forest. There's a strange satisfaction in letting it go. You pat the horse's neck and turn back toward the sound of the others. Historians still argue whether kings needed these symbols of control, the hunt, the feast, the castle, or if, deep down, they needed reminders that not everything can be mastered. You suspect it's the latter. Mastery is a myth. Endurance is the true prize. You rejoin the hunting party at a slower pace, accepting the cheers and applause with a modest nod. Let them think what they will. Let them tell the story however they choose. You know what really matters, not the chase, not the catch, but the journey itself. The castle will be waiting when you return, its walls unyielding, its corridors unchanged. And you will walk them again, knowing now that getting lost isn't a failure. It's part of finding your way. By the time you return to the castle, the afternoon has softened into that lazy golden light that slants low across the fields and makes everything it touches seem older, gentler. The stone walls glow faintly, as if basking in the fading warmth, and the banners atop the towers flutter without urgency in the breeze. You dismount carefully, your knees protesting slightly after hours in the saddle. A groom leads your horse away, and you stand for a moment in the courtyard, head tilted back to take in the full, towering sprawl of the castle. It's strange how differently it looks now. Yesterday, it was a labyrinth, a snare waiting to humiliate you. Today, it feels more like an old companion, cantankerous, stubborn, but oddly loyal. A mainstream fact, castles were meant to impress as much as they were to defend. Their towering walls and vast courtyards were physical manifestations of power. A lord or king's enemies needed only to see the soaring battlements and thick gates to understand, this is not a man easily toppled. But no stone wall, no matter how thick, can shield a king from his own doubts, or from a knight spent wandering his own halls like a ghost. You cross the courtyard at a leisurely pace, nodding to the guards at the gatehouse and the servants bustling to prepare for the evening meal. You catch sight of the goat again, the same one from last night, you're sure of it, nibbling unconcernedly at a stray tuft of grass near the kitchen entrance. You give it a mock salute as you pass. The goat flicks an ear, utterly unimpressed. Historians still argue whether the daily life of a castle was as glamorous as the poetry and chronicles suggest. More often, it was messy, chaotic, and steeped in backbreaking work. Castles were not just symbols of power, they were small, teeming worlds, complete with all the noise, smells, and grit of human life. You re-enter the castle through a side door, the coolness of the stone immediately embracing you. The scent of roasting meat and fresh bread hangs heavy in the air, a pleasant contrast to the dusty corridors of last night. You follow a familiar path, one you know well enough now to avoid any unexpected detours. No kitchen boys darting out of dark corridors, no sudden dead ends. Just the steady, comforting rhythm of footsteps on stone. A quirky tidbit, some castles employed full-time guides, often young boys, to lead guests through the confusing maze of halls and staircases. These wayfinders knew every shortcut and secret passage, ensuring that visiting nobles didn't embarrass themselves by getting lost before they reached the king. You wonder if you should appoint one for yourself, purely for the sake of efficiency, of course. You reach your private chambers without incident this time, pausing just before the heavy wooden doors. You rest a hand on the iron latch, feeling the cool bite of the metal. Inside, the fire has been lit. The room glows with a soft, inviting warmth. You shrug off your riding cloak and sink into the heavy chair by the hearth, stretching your legs toward the flames. You let yourself relax, staring into the shifting, restless dance of the fire. It's easy to lose yourself in it, to let the cares of kingship dissolve in the hypnotic flicker of light and shadow. Historians still debate the role of solitude in a king's life. Was it a sign of weakness to seek moments alone, or a necessity for maintaining the clarity and resolve needed to rule? You've come to believe it's the latter. Even kings need moments when they are simply men. A servant enters quietly, setting down a goblet of wine and a platter of fruit before disappearing again without a word. You sip the wine, rich, dark, slightly tart, and think about the castle walls surrounding you. They're not just barriers or defenses. They're reminders of the weight you carry, of the resilience required to bear it, of the simple, stubborn truth that even when you lose your way, the walls will still be there when you find it again. You set the goblet down and lean back, eyes half closed. The fire crackles and pops, and outside, the evening deepens, the castle settling into its ancient, patient silence. Tomorrow, there will be petitions to hear, disputes to settle, alliances to forge. Tomorrow, the labyrinth will open its arms to you once more, and you will step into it, unafraid. The fire shrinks slowly to a bed of glowing coals as you sit in the quiet, and for once, nobody comes knocking. No steward with urgent news, no advisor clamoring for a decision, no scribe asking for your signature on some crisp bit of parchment. Just you, the gentle crackle of the hearth, and the heavy, comforting stillness of the castle's innards. You rise at last, stretching arms that creak slightly from a day well spent. The goblet is nearly empty. You drain it, set it carefully aside, and wander toward the window. The shutters are open. Beyond them, the castle grounds lie draped in deepening blue. The last of the sunset clings to the edge of the sky, a faint orange thread being slowly unwoven by night. A few torches flicker along the battlements, but the world feels hushed, the castle folding itself in for sleep. You lean on the sill, elbows planted firmly on the cool stone. A mainstream fact, nighttime in a medieval castle was a perilous affair. Without the benefit of widespread torchlight or lanterns, most people simply stayed put after sundown. The risk of injury, tripping on stairs, falling into unseen holes, was too great. Even kings thought twice before venturing into the dark. You now understood that on a personal level. The breeze rises, whispering through the narrow window slits, carrying the mingled scents of fresh hay from the stables and the faint, mineral tang of the moat. Somewhere below, a night watchman calls out the hour, his voice thin but resolute. Historians still argue whether such rituals were more for discipline or comfort, whether announcing the hours through the night was about maintaining order or reassuring those huddled within the walls that the world hadn't ended while they slept. Perhaps it was both. You step back from the window and pull the shutters closed, muting the night. The heavyweight settles into place with a satisfying thud, shutting out the cool air but also the castle's ever-present murmur. You move through the room, letting your hand trail along the familiar furniture, the chest at the foot of the bed, the carved chair by the hearth, the washstand with its cold, silent basin. These things have remained unchanged through the nights and days you have ruled here. They are the small, solid anchors that keep you tethered when the broader labyrinth grows too chaotic. A quirky tidbit crosses your mind. Some castles had elaborate bedding ceremonies, rituals in which a host would personally ensure a guest's bed was made, sheets freshly turned down, fire stoked. It was a sign of hospitality and status. These days, of course, you rely on servants for such things. But the gesture lingers, even if the ritual has faded. You remove your crown with a careful hand, setting it down on the small table by the bed where, for once, it seems less like a symbol and more like what it is, a crafted ring of gold and jewels. Impressive, yes, but lifeless without the head that carries it. You slip under the heavy covers, the linens cool against your skin, the woolen blankets weighted and thick. You pull them up to your chin and sigh, a long, quiet exhale of a man who's carried the weight of the day and now sets it down, if only for a few hours. Outside, the castle dreams its slow, stone dreams, of battles fought, kings crowned, walls built and rebuilt. Inside, you close your eyes and let the darkness wash over you, not as an enemy but as a blanket, a refuge. Historians still argue whether kings ever truly slept easy, whether the burden of rule could ever be set aside completely. Most conclude that no, even in sleep, a king carries his kingdom with him, tucked between his ribs like a secret. But tonight, you feel the rare luxury of setting that burden down. Not because the problems have vanished. Not because the corridors have straightened themselves out. but because you have learned the castle's true lesson. Strength is not in knowing every turn and trap. Strength is in getting lost and continuing anyway. You drift towards sleep, not with the fitful tossing of the worried, but with the slow, surrendering ease of someone who understands his place in the maze, and who, finally, is at peace with it. The dawn breaks gently, softening the edges of the castle's towering silhouette against the awakening sky. You wake with a quiet certainty settling over you, a calm not born of mastery, but of acceptance. The corridors await you, unchanged and unyielding, but no longer daunting. You have walked their length and breadth, felt their cold stone and secret turns, met their shadows and goats, and found yourself not diminished but more whole. You rise slowly, the weight of the crown lighter than before, the fabric of your robes comfortable and familiar. The castle is no longer a prison but a place of stories, a living monument to resilience, folly, and the endless dance of power and humanity. A mainstream fact, castles were designed to endure beyond any one ruler's reign, to stand as symbols and shelters across generations. They are palimpsests of ambition, history, and hope. You move to the window and look out over the grounds bathed in golden light. The stables bustle, the gardens bloom, and life hums with persistent energy. The castle's many voices blend into a steady chorus of continuity. Historians still debate whether the grandeur of castles inspired loyalty or fear among those who lived under their shadow. Perhaps it was both, a delicate balance that every king had to navigate. You turn from the window and prepare to meet the day, your footsteps echoing with a newfound confidence. A quirky tidbit lingers in your thoughts. Some castles had chambers dedicated solely to laughter and merriment, where jesters and minstrels kept the court's spirits bright, reminding all that even in stone and shadow, joy could thrive. As you walk through the halls, you carry that lesson with you. That a king's strength lies not only in his command but in his capacity to embrace the twists and turns, the surprises and stumbles, and to keep moving forward. The castle, vast and complex, remains steadfast, an eternal reminder that sometimes, the greatest journey is learning to find your way when you're lost. You step boldly through the great hall, the eyes of your court upon you, not with judgment but with respect. Tonight, they will tell stories, not just of a king who got lost in his own castle, but of one who found his path despite it all. You smile, a quiet, knowing smile, and carry yourself with the grace of a ruler who has weathered the maze and come through wiser. The castle may be endless, but so is your resolve. Now, as the day fades and the castle settles into its timeless silence once more, you can let go of the day's burdens. The stone walls stand firm, the shadows grow long, and the echoes of laughter and footsteps fade softly away. Rest now, knowing that even the greatest kings are shaped by their journeys, not just the triumphs, but the moments of confusion, the unexpected turns, the simple act of continuing on. The castle sleeps. And so do you. Let your breath slow, your thoughts soften, and your mind drift gently into peaceful dreams. You have found your way. Good night. Sweet dreams.